Okay.
Did anyone get a notification that I'm recording?
Got it.
No.
Yes.
Well, I
Yes.
saw something but it's disappeared now.
Are we allowing third parties or others to record? I did not clarify before I got a request.
I think no at present.
Okay, the recording will be up on the website, everyone attending, so we will post that as soon as it is finished.
Okay, let's go. Then welcome. I'm Dan Friedman, distinguished emeritus professor of economics. It's my honor to moderate three panelists who will help us understand a crucial but underappreciated connection, well, that's suggested in this title between insurance industry and this changing world, natural world in which we live. Is the way I describe it is the insurance industry is modern society's rubber that meets the planetary road of climate change. And I think we'll understand some of those connections much better after we hear from our panelists. The first perspectives come from Professor Simon Penny of UC Irvine. Professor Penny spans several disciplines. He has affiliations in the art department, in electronic art and design, in informatics, and in music. He's the author of many interdisciplinary books, often emphasizing embodied cognition. Maybe I should mention the latest, forthcoming from Routledge, is entitled Skill, Making Embodied Cognition and Neuroscience. He's the editor of the journal AI and Society and is a member or director of many interdisciplinary organizations that deal with sustainability and related issues. Today, he'll share a personal story about last year's devastating fire in LA. We'll get a firsthand account of how the insurance industry grapples not entirely successfully with the changing climate. Professor Penny, please.
Thank you so much, Dan. I don't appear to be on speaker view at this point, but I will begin my presentation to you all. For most, the Eaton fire, January the 7th, 2025, is now a hazy memory. For the roughly 100,000 people directly affected, the disaster is ongoing. We all have our stories, few of them good. The physical damage is vast. Nearly 10,000 structures, homes and businesses were destroyed. Tangled ruins and bulldozed lots still line streets in neighbourhoods and shopping areas. Homes, schools, libraries, churches and parks remain contaminated by a new range of toxins. The psychological damage, while less visible, is deep and widespread. My job here is to give a first-person report of what it's like to be an Eaton fire survivor with two standing structures. At 3:30 a.m. on January the 8th, we were instructed to evacuate, having watched the fires advance across the hills. I'm going to save you the ghastly slideshow, pictures that I cannot bring myself to look at. The following narrative in broad strokes steps through my experience over nearly 18 months. I do not wish to portray myself as a martyr or any more of a victim than anyone else in the community. While these details are specific to my experience, every victim of the fires has similar stories, many much worse. So I'll start with a little prehistory. In 2024, my insurance company agent notified me that farmers were putting up my insurance premium by 500%. Clearly an effort to get me off the books without actually cancelling my policy. What other business can raise prices 500% overnight and survive? I had no recourse. On advice, I switched to the so-called California Fair Plan. What a grandiose mistake that turned out to be. Farmers took my 15 years of on-time premium payments with no claims and walked away. This is a common story with various insurers. Some people who had dutifully paid for 30 years suffered the same fate. Some were uninsured when their houses burned to the ground. We discovered that insurance companies had wildly varying responses, even the same adjusters in the same companies. More broadly, insurers were finding any pretext to deny coverage. The circumstantial evidence of a home burned to the ground is difficult to refute. Permeation by a cocktail of carcinogens and poisons is less tangible. Insurance companies are denying that fire contamination is covered by their policies and lowballing estimates. This section of my talk is called Toxins, Community Organising and Citizen Science. Those of us who understood the dangers of wildland-urban interface fires and the toxins they generate were surprised that no state or federal agencies, not EPA or FEMA or the Army Corps of Engineers or LA County Health Department, did any post-fire toxin testing. This put the burden of testing the contamination of homes and yards on the shoulders of citizens. What did we know about the profession of certified industrial hygienist, of professional remediators and abatement specialists? We learned quickly. The community was suddenly full of such operators, many coming in from out of state like vultures to roadkill. There was fraud, there was looting. The National Guard closed the area for weeks, even to property owners. It's troubling to find soldiers in camo with machine guns around their necks telling you can't go to your home. There was no water for months as our water company treatment works and piping were damaged by the fire. In this context, many residents spent over $10,000 per house on testing, followed by recommended remediations that often figured in the many tens of thousands of dollars, only to find that at the end of this remediation, their houses were still contaminated. This is a very common story. Others, less well-informed or with no other options, whose houses survived, cleaned up as best they could and moved back in. We learned about well-known toxins like lead and arsenic and asbestos that at least had regulations associated with them. The more challenging toxins generated in the firestorm are the new ones that fall into two categories. The plastics in homes and cars generate cyanide, furans, dioxins, PFOAs, EDCs, endocrine disrupting chemicals, and other forever chemicals and carcinogens. Electronics and solar electric related technologies liberate toxins that have not been regulated, some of the more toxic being hexavalent chromium, chromium-6, beryllium, selenium, also molybdenum, cadmium, mercury, nickel, copper, and other trace elements used in electronics. This toxic cocktail of gases and fine particles was pumped through the area at pressure by 100-mile-per-hour winds, permeating soft furnishings and wall cavities, and rained down across LA and far out to sea. Toxic residues threaten public health. The public health crisis is imminent, and no agency wants to acknowledge this. Now, activists in the community are the unsung heroes in this. Two organizations that I'm involved with have done stalwart work. The Eaton Fire Residents United, EFRU, rapidly formed and took on the responsibility of doing citizen science, collecting data on toxins and remediation, creating a uniquely valuable database in the absence of state action. Eaton Fire Survivors Network, EFSN, rapidly became a clearinghouse for insurance, rebuilding and remediation issues and political mobilization. CAP-LA provided free soil testing. Other groups provided legal aid, mental health counseling, and food aid. At this point, I'm going to share my screen and show a short video and then two websites, or three websites. So this is a video released by EFRU.
We're Eden Fire evacuees, and we are dealing with serious problems with the insurance companies, from the building coverage to the contents coverage to the ALE, etc. We've been displaced since the fire, which is 14 or 15 months now. We have no home, we have no clothes, we have no anything. Our house is full of lead, asbestos, barium, and it's long-term health issues, cancer and so forth. We've learned so much that we're not going to settle And we're not moving back into a contaminated home. And that's my thing that I go back to with my grandkids. I go, I don't want to see you dead before me, because you can't keep going in and out of the house and exposing yourself to these materials. We haven't even started getting our contents back. We haven't started repairs on the house, and it's probably going to be another year.
So that's a video. It's been posted by the EFRU. I now want to just quickly show you two or three websites. This, for your interest, is, can you see the EFRU website? This is the EFRU website. They've built a contamination map of the whole area in the absence of that being done by any state agency, and they're advancing bills at the state level. Indoor pre-remediation testing results, 100% of the homes tested positive. Indoor post-testing results, 6 out of 10 homes that had been remediated by professional remediators continued to be toxic. The website continues with various other details. The data maps are a really important source of data for activists. I will now move to, if I can, I will move to, this is the Eaton Fire Survivors Network website. Recovery follows the money, EFSN moves the money. This is a activist news site. They're doing fantastic work. CAP-LA is coordinating with academics to advance remediation and so on. I'll get back to my talk now. So, standing structures versus total losses, the long tail of Kafkaesque bureaucracy. You may think that having a property survive the fires is a blessing. I did. But now neighbours that have lost their houses are moving back into clean new houses built with insurance funds, and I wish my rental property had burned down. Both our houses are contaminated with fire toxins. Remediation estimates amount to about $150,000 on my home and closer to $250,000 on the rental. In both cases, respective insurance companies have refused to cover. I'm about to pay $20,000 to clean the crawl space in the attic of my home. The lead levels were detected were measured 3,391 grams per square meter or something. Micrograms per square meter. Now, that's 50 times the legal limit. Not 50% more, 50 times the legal limit. Yet CalFare says this is not fire damage and therefore they will not pay for the cleanup. As an evacuee, I'm paying the costs on 3 properties: mortgage, insurance, property tax, utilities on my home and my rental, and temporary accommodation costs. We will move in July, our 4th home move in 18 months. I was diagnosed, well, I'm nearly done. I was diagnosed with trauma, PTSD, a couple of months after the fires. I went through a year of insomnia, violent nightmares, waking 4 and 5 times a night, deep depression, anxiety attacks. I still have anxiety when I drive into my neighborhood. So do thousands of others. My neighbor told me she still fights back the tears. Long-time residents have left. Communities and neighborhoods are hollowed out. This intangible but real cost that the immediate community has absorbed will never be made good. I feel alienated from the home I expected to live in for years. Musician friends lost the recording studio they'd built over 2 decades and a lifetime collection of musical instruments. Whether total loss or standing structures, each individual has the heart-rending task of enumerating all their lost property and inventories in order to argue with adjusters over the dollar value of the items, which in so many cases are irreplaceable. Have I got a couple of minutes, Dan?
Yes, I would say 4 minutes would be
Okay, great,
would
perfect.
be
I
excellent.
and my partner bought a local home as a rental and investment. All the houses at the back, the next door house and the houses on the block in front were burned to the ground. Ours survived, probably due to the cinder block perimeter walls. We hired an independent CAH at a cost of $5,000. We then sent his report to a well-regarded remediation company whose quote was $195,000. Remediation requires the removal of internal walls to get at contaminated cavities, and this implies the demolition of the kitchen. So with the kitchen replacement, the cost of the project will be in the order of $250,000. Farmers hired their own industrial hygienist company and sent this to their chosen remediator and decided that what we were due was $44,000. So they've given us 20% of what it will take to repair the house by independent judgments. But in a Kafkaesque twist, farmers paid the $44,000 not to us, but to the mortgage bank. The mortgage company then required us to sign a repair affidavit saying that we would return the house to the pre-fire condition with the funds. But this is clearly impossible. Yet we could not get the money if we didn't sign the document. So I feel like I'm perjured myself. And the mortgage bank will not release the funds until the work is 80% done. But we don't have $200,000 to start the job. So effectively, they keep our money and invest it for the foreseeable future. We cannot remediate. We cannot rent. We're liable for providing a safe environment for tenants. We cannot sell, or we'll be excluded from the SCE court case. So we have to pay all the costs on an empty home, including insurance. We're in several court cases against California Fair Plan, Farmers, and SCE. I've activated 2 Small Business Administration disaster loans. I'm working with the state on mortgage deferral, and managing all this takes 10 to 20 hours a week. And of course, it's just a continuing stress. The Eaton fire was a disaster for the city, for the neighborhood, and for every individual. It was, by some estimates, the most toxic urban fire in US history. But the 2026 fires are already burning, and we must expect many more Eaton-scale fires in the coming decade. I'm pleased to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon, for the talk, and I think it will connect well with some of the other presentations we have, which start from very different perspectives. Our second panelist is UCSC's own research professor, Mike Beck. Mike is director of our Center for Coastal Climate Resilience, and he is AXA Chair in Coastal Resilience. Mike and his team aim to reduce the risks to people, property, and nature, leveraging work across science, policy, and practice. Mike served for 20 years as lead marine scientist at the Nature Conservancy. He's advised government agencies in many countries and worked with many global agencies and companies such as AXA, Munich Re, Swiss Re, reinsurance companies like and Lloyd's of London, also Risk Management Solutions and the World Bank. Mike has authored more than 100 peer-reviewed scientific papers and numerous op-eds in the LA Times, New York Times, and elsewhere. Today, he will share some perspectives on the current situation and show how the insurance industry, if it does its job right, can become a major positive force in healing our planet. Thanks, Mike. Please take it away.
Okie dokie. Let me just get this popped up. All right. Seeing my screen?
Yep.
All right. Perfect. Simon, I'm very, very sorry to hear about your experiences, and I've appreciated all the exchanges that we've had in email in setting up for this. I recognize and your pain, and I wish you recovery in many, many ways associated with this. It's a not unfamiliar story for me, maybe not as painful as the one you've described, but I work with communities around the world on these issues, often with hurricanes and flooding, more than anywhere else. And I have many friends and family in the greater St. Pete area that have many hard stories like you've just illustrated. And but I do want to talk a bit about the kind of work that we do. Some of it in partnership with the industry, all of it trying to vastly improve how we work to reduce risks to people, property, and nature together. I don't need to. It was very, very clear from what Simon said. And sorry for the photo on the right. This, of course, is one of our favorite breakfast spots, rolling into the river at the mouth of the San Lorenzo. Who would have ever thought such things can happen? And the lower photo is from where my daughter has lived in the St. Pete area. And I've helped her to evacuate 3 different times in the past 5 years. Not necessarily something a father wants to be doing. As far
Mike,
as the,
Mike,
yes,
sorry to interrupt. Could you go to presentation view?
you're not seeing.
No, we are, but we're seeing all the thumbnails to the
We're
left.
seeing
So there might be a,
down in the lower right of your screen, in the very bottom row, there's a slider, and to the left of the slider is a little rectangular thing. If you click on that,
Yeah, that.
that's it. Click on that.
Yeah, this is a problem.
How about Control L?
I don't know why it is doing this in the way that it has done this. Uh,
Okay. Well, maybe we have to be content with
Yeah, we
what you were
can get
showing.
by with that. At least those of us that have big screens.
yeah, but I don't. So annoying. Let me try to just share the screen.
there should be a presentation mode.
No, I know, but the problem is that when I don't normally have this kind of a problem, but for some reason the presentation mode is switching between my 2 screens in a very unfortunate way.
Uh-huh. If you
Uh,
go to presentation mode before you share and
I
then
think
share.
you've
Yeah.
got the presentation, you've got the put the PowerPoint on the same screen as your Zoom window. That should fix it.
One
That's
second.
my
Oh
tip.
my
I've done
goodness.
that. That's been my problem before sometimes.
You could
Or
well
when
be
you
right.
share
You could well be
all
right.
screens, share your whole desktop instead of sharing just a window. It's another option.
Yep, give me a half second here. Let me just try it with the presentation once more. Uh, Hopefully that will work. You just seeing the presentation now?
That's good. Yep, that worked.
Ugh, okay, apologies.
All good.
All right, moving along. Okay, just a few words about our center. The center's been around for past 3.5 years. We have supported over 100 projects all around campus, many postdocs, fellows, graduate students, some computing facilities, professional development courses. Just by way of example, and then some very action-oriented work on policies and financial incentives, just by way of example. I'll have a website link at the end. You can kind of see we have these in a 2-page fact sheet, impact report coming. As far as the work that we do very specifically within our group, what we try to do is we assess coastal risks, we value the benefits of nature for reducing those risks, and then we use those rigorous social and economic values to be able to identify incentives to invest in these solutions to reduce risk, enhance the environment. I'm not going to go through all of the models that we use, but these are actually standard models for the risk industry, the insurance industry, as well as engineering for assessing offshore waves and water levels, changing how they come near shore, what happens when they cross over habitats like mangroves if you have them present, or the further flooding that you get if you don't have them present, and then the impacts and the consequences. And I'll just show you a couple of slides about what these kinds of results look like, and then I'll get into how these help inform solutions, including with the risk industry. So we've recently been completing some global models for all small island developing states around the world and throughout the Caribbean to identify flood risk and understand the role of nature in reducing that. So this is available online at the QR code showing flooding. This is Puerto Rico. What happens? How much does flooding increase if reefs are lost? What about if climate changes? How much does that change? Or mangrove loss? So we do all of the flood mapping for a variety of return periods, just like the industry does. And in some places in partnership with the industry, and I'll show you some of those. And then here in Miami, giving you some example of what that then looks like for the economic damages. So these are the current flood risk under a 50-year event, how much that increases with reef loss, climate change, and mangrove loss. So this just gives you an idea of the kinds of tools and models that we're developing that we then help to visualize online. We have similar work that will be coming out in Santa Cruz as part of the 5th climate assessment. So these are the tools that later in summer will be available. You can look at flood risk under a variety of different storm return periods, future conditions. There's also an ability to look at some adaptation options like dunes, assess the economic damages, and then be able to visualize these in some very robust ways. And again, we do the cost benefit analysis on those solutions. And these are hooked to some very high resolution models. This is a 2D visualization, a visualization and game engine driven of a 2D hydrodynamic model for the bomb swell that took off the end of the wharf. And then it's calibrated against some of the visual images of flooding during that event. And this captures quite a bit of the dynamics here. And this will be part of the new Seymour exhibit at the Seymour Center. That'll be opening in a couple of weeks' time. All right. That represents a decade and a half of work in many different contexts to understand risks and the value of nature for reducing those. And then we use that work to develop solutions at a variety of levels and in some key areas, like including nature in national accounts, rethinking our infrastructure investments, how we change, how we fund disaster recovery, and then how we change incentives for nature and turn those into innovative demonstration projects. All right, first on policy, we've been working together over the past 8 years with a group of federal agency partners, developing approaches for understanding how to restore coral reefs to offer risk reduction benefits. And this was approved by the U.S. Coral Reef Task Force a few years back. If you go to the task force website now, this is one of the few things available still on that website. This was since turned into, through executive actions or legislation, policies identifying reefs as natural infrastructure in Hawaii, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, American Samoa, Guam. Did I say Hawaii? Maybe said it twice. Northern Marianas. Really working to change and reshape policy. And this was very important for how recovery funds got spent after Hurricanes Irma and Maria, because it used to be that those kinds of funds, both hazard mitigation and recovery, could only be used for human-built infrastructure, not for the coral reef or natural infrastructure, our natural seawalls, which were providing protection benefits and which we can quantify those benefits from. They're now eligible for funding after both for hazard mitigation and disaster recovery funding. We've also helped to develop insurance policies for nature itself. This was in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. What happens is in a hurricane, the waves smash into the reef, knock the corals off the reef, reducing the height of that reef so more wave energy can come in the future, impacting hotels in these areas south of Cancun and throughout the Mesoamerican reef. So we got an insurance policy on the reef so that if there were damaging winds and waves, we could quickly pay and activate community divers to help gather those corals, to help clean off the flotsam and jetsam that washes off of shore and onto those reefs, like refrigerators and fishing nets that continue to destroy the reef. These policies have since been expanded in a variety of places, and just this year to mangroves as well. And that's things that we've been working on at a variety of levels to help green a portion of the industry. We've also worked, and just recently, we published a couple of different papers with Moody's and Risk Management Solutions. Risk Management Solutions is now a part of Moody's. They are one of the top two firms globally modeling risk for the wider industry, and obviously as part of Moody's, very critically important to things like bond ratings and the like. They haven't included nature in their risk models in the past, and we're working with them to try to help change that for the industry. For example, showing in their models, so our models are very similar and open access and public. Theirs, not so much, but we can work with them to incorporate nature and show in their models the value, for example, of mangroves in reducing flood damages during these events. 4.1 billion, about 30% reduction for the mangroves that were in place in this geography. Also turns out their model shows that if you build in front of mangroves, like this little image here, you increase flood damages because the mangroves are working just like any defense to pile up water. And if you allow development in front of those, which we have, then you're increasing risk. I just recently posted a new visualization. This is that area showing results from our model of flooding with and without mangroves. And so you can see what happens in the course, and this is a 50-year storm events simulation. And you can see the flooding that happens with and without mangroves. And then we sum up the damages. Again, this was the first visualization I showed you showing what the benefits of mangroves are, and that's the top of these bars throughout this area. So this is, if you didn't have mangroves, how much would damages increase in these kinds of events? Working together with Galena Hale, we showed that it's not just averted damages, that home buyers take these considerations into account. So we look using Zillow data at home sales, more than 1 million home sales over the past 20 years. Lots of factors considered, but we showed that the closer you are, so after major storm seasons, so that's the zeros on here. After major storm seasons, the value of coastal homes goes down. The closer you are to mangroves, the less they go down, and the earlier they bounce back up. And so this is saying that even before there was data available about this, home buyers understood that you will get less damages if you buy in places near mangroves. We've also just recently released some new resilience assets. So these are certifiable risk reduction benefits from wetland restoration projects that deliver benefits for reducing flooding to people and property. So you can find this methodology with credits that can be certified by Vera, and we have an online tool accessing some of our data to be able to calculate the resilient asset values of restoration projects at different sizes. There's a lot more to be said there, but I got a couple more slides. I'll finish up here. Here are, based on all of this work, we have some concerns with U.S. coastal insurance. Insurance increasingly regulates development. That's now the thing as much as anything else, helping to decide where and how we build, whether or not you can get insurance. But insurance doesn't just reduce risk, it creates it. That's in part by years of subsidies, the National Flood Insurance Program, $20 billion in debt. But it's also incentives. We offer incentives for hardening that allow us to build in risky environments. The main flood incentives in the National Flood Insurance Program, that is, which can reduce your premium, are home elevations and levees. Those allow you to increase development in floodplains. Floodplains once contained wetlands. So when we allow more development in floodplains, you're surely going into the lowest, wettest, riskiest areas, and you're removing your natural defenses, which we've shown with the industry have significant value for flood risk reduction. Okay, what are my recommendations? Okay, there's a lot to be said here, but I'm going to summarize just a few words. One, price risk accurately. We're getting there, but and it's going to be a bit painful to get there because of years of subsidies for risk. We need to include nature and risk models to price risk accurately and to stop rewarding risk and start rewarding nature. We have other work that shows that incentives matter and even small signals matter in doing that. And we have some ways to turn those signals into investment opportunities, thinking about insurance not just as a regulator of risk, but again, as Simon pointed out, some ones, entities that have a lot of money to invest, and they should be investing better in risk reduction, and these wetland resilience assets may be one way to do that. Okay, sum up, we partner with lots of different folks to assess coastal risks, value adaptation solutions, identify incentives, and these are some of our partners and some of where you can find us. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mike. That was very useful perspectives and ones that we don't hear so often. Our final panelist today is Josh Harrison. He's director of the Study for Force Majeure at UCSC. The center is an art, science, policy, research collaborative that's focused on climate resilience, regenerative design, indigenous knowledge systems. His work brings together artists, scientists, indigenous knowledge keepers, civic educators, and policy thinkers to develop pathways to a resilient future. And a recent example of their work is Fire Brings Water, a multi-year EPA-funded environmental education project that works in partnership with the Washoe tribe of Nevada and California. The project trains Washoe youth and young adults to work across traditional fire knowledge, contemporary fire science, watershed education, and geospatial analysis in the Greater Tahoe Basin. Another example the kind of work they do is the Sensorium for the World Ocean, which is a multi-sensory immersive installation and virtual reality experience that translates ocean data into embodied public experience. Today, so he's doing a lot of different things. Today, Josh will help connect the dots between the first two presentations. He'll show how insurance industry and modern society more generally, and the planet as a whole, will all be better off when the insurance industry does its job better. So please, Josh, take it away.
Well, thank you, Daniel. My signal seems to be a little bit weak. Are you hearing me? Let me
Yes.
just get. Oh, good. And before I start, I just also want to say, Simon, thank you so much for sharing your story. And Mike, thank you for the incredible work you demonstrated. And I think the distance between the successful approaches Mike is taking in looking at, analyzing, measuring work, and the gap between what Simon has experienced and that knowledge is where I want to sort of take the conversation today, because I think there's some structural elements that sort of take us there. Again, I'm not a scientist. I come from an arts background. I look at whole systems. So looking at the systems that are there, I think I have some thoughts about how this can work. Now, let me see if I can share my screen. No, that's not it. Try again. This is the zoom of the present here. Let's try again one more time. Okay.
That's good.
So great. Thank you for bearing with me on that. Just want to say this is a really important panel, and I think, Dan, a couple of weeks ago on the April 28th Salon, you showed how extreme climate events are mathematically disproportionate in their impact rather. That's, the big events do a lot more damage than the small ones. And what I want to talk a little bit more about what the institution today that's best positioned to act on that kind of math has built, the kind of internal governance structures that prevent it from doing the work we all need insurance to do. Let's see. Sorry, my slides are not moving. There we go. Okay. The insurance, sorry, having a little bit of an issue here with my slides, but let's go. Most people think of like insurance as a financial product. It's a transaction, you pay a premium, something goes wrong, you file a claim. But that framing understates, I think, what insurance actually does in society. And as Mike pointed out in the flood zones, insurance determines where homes can be financed, which communities can attract investment, which futures remain economically viable. It's the infrastructure that makes risk bearable at scale. When it functions well, it's largely invisible, which is a part of why its failure, I think, is so poorly understood. And when an insurer withdraws from a market, as it's doing in California, the risk doesn't disappear, it transfers. It transfers to individual homeowners, to municipal governments, to state programs of last resort, and ultimately to the federal government and the taxpayers. And the question of who bears the risk is not settled by the market. It's settled by whomever is left standing when the industry leaves. And that's why insurance is not only a pricing problem, it's a governance problem. Okay. Now, insurance did not begin as a speculative financial instrument. It began as a social technology for making risk collectively bearable. I'm sorry. In 1733, let's do a little bit of history here because I think it's instructive. 1733, Benjamin Franklin wrote in the Pennsylvania Gazette that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. He wasn't just offering a folk aphorism. He was building what became an institution. 3 years later, he organized the Union Fire Company, and that was the first volunteer fire brigade in the American colonies. By 1752, he'd gone further still and founded a company called the Philadelphia Contribution Ship, a mutual insurance company that still exists today. And the key word there is mutual. It was based on the notion that we're in this together. That result was not abstract. Philadelphia never burned the way London burned in 1666, the way Charleston burned in 1740, the way Chicago burned in 1871. Prevention worked. Mutual accountability worked. The institution that Franklin built did exactly what it was designed to do. It aligned individual interest with collective welfare and made the whole community safer than any individual within it could have made on their own. And that's the founding logic of American insurance. Not risk pricing per se, but prevention. It wasn't about wealth extraction. It was about mutual aid formalized into durable institutions. Similarly, the early marine syndicates that emerged from Lloyd's 18th century coffee shop operated on a very similar principle. They were not buying financial products. They were formalizing a community of shared exposure and shared interest with a direct stake in better ships, better navigation, and better weather forecasting. And that founding logic carried the insurance industry forward well into the 20th century in remarkably productive ways. Insurance companies funded crash testing research and lobbied for mandatory seatbelts. That reduced traffic fatalities by more than 50% over several decades. They wrote fire-resistant safety codes. They mandated different kinds of electrical installations. They pioneered all kinds of regulations from workers' compensation on. These weren't specifically acts of corporate citizenship. They were the original insurance logic operating as it should. The institution has a genuine financial interest in prevention, and the institution acts on that interest. It's not only in the company's best interest, it's in the community's best interest, and the interests are aligned in a good system. But how did this break down? Well, in my opinion, the crisis began when prevention became less visible in the insurance institution than investment return. And as the companies got bigger, the float, the pool of premiums that are held before claims are paid, became more valuable as an investment vehicle than as a reserve against loss. And so that changed the institutional center of gravity of the way the corporations functioned. Underwriting stopped being the purpose of the company. It became a cost center. Prevention investment became structurally less defensible. And the industry that pioneered seatbelts and fire codes is now deploying much of that same float into the fossil fuel infrastructure most responsible for the risks it can no longer underwrite. This is not a return to the industry's natural state. It's a departure from a founding logic that made insurance both financially stable and socially legitimate for centuries. And the scale of this failure is a number that's well understood. Swiss Re puts it at $1.8 trillion annually. That is to say, the gap between the total economic losses from climate-related disasters and the losses that are structurally insured. And this is way more than a rounding error. It's a structural feature of the system. And, as Simon so clearly pointed out, you can see how it plays out in California. State Farm, which is the state's largest home insurer, stopped writing new homeowners policies in 2023 and non-renewed thousands of existing ones. The FAIR Plan, California's insurer of last resort, more than doubled its policy count between 2020 and 2024 and carried over $4 billion in Palisades fire exposure alone. Now, homeowners insurance, and we heard this also from Simon, now accounts for 9% of a typical mortgage payment. That's the highest share on record. The Senate Budget Committee recently called this looming economic threat, something with the potential to trigger an economic crisis on the scale of the fiscal crisis of 2008. And this is not a California problem alone. It's happening in Florida, Louisiana, Colorado, Texas, and literally every market where meaningful wildfire, hurricane, or flood exposure exists. And the pattern is the same everywhere. And the number that it measures is not a market number. In my opinion, it's a governance number. Okay. Well, we've seen some of this in Simon's talk, how this plays out. But I want to highlight a little bit about what that governance failure looks like as data and as written policy beyond experience. I mean, Simon's attic, as he said, tested at nearly 50 times the safe level of lead. And 2 of his properties are completely uninhabitable. Both of his insurers, CalFair and Farmers, have closed those claims. Its CalFair denial from a conversation with Simon rests on the single clause. The policy defined smoke and ash damage as being visible. And because the contamination was not visible to the naked eye, they argue there was no damage to compensate. That clause was recently struck down in court, but the impact of it obviously remains. And the groups like the Eaton Fire Residents United, their testing data puts that experience into a systemic context. 100% of homes tested before remediation were positive for lead. Over 90% had some kind of motion after remediation. 6 out of 10 homes were still unsafe to return to. Those numbers were not produced by the agencies who should have been responsible for producing them. State and federal agencies refused to test. They walked away from that accountability and took citizen science organizations to fill that regulatory vacuum. And that's what a governance failure looks like from the inside. It's not a natural disaster that caused that. It wasn't an act of God, or as insurance companies call force majeure, and which is ironically the name of our institution for precisely that reason. We look at these kinds of activities that are, that are beyond allegedly ordinary force. They were a policy designed to deny what the science can prove, and a system that chose at every decision point not to respond to the obvious real needs that were there. So why does this keep happening? And one of the standard answers is that climate change has made the risk genuinely unmanageable. And I want to push back a bit on that. I think there's more things going on that are more institutional on the industry side. Researchers Repenning and Sterling have identified a pattern they call the capability gap. And what that means is that under performance pressure, institutions default to reactive response rather than capability investment. And the more they respond reactively, the less capacity they have to build the capabilities that would let them respond differently. It's a self-confirming cycle. And the insurance industry is a textbook case of this kind of behavior. Every quarter that they reprice and every market withdrawal erodes the institutional capacity to invest in prevention. It expands that capability gap. The evidence that the industry cites as proof of uninsurability is not simply external. It's been worsened by decades of underinvestment in prevention, resilience, and in risk reduction. There's another name for this in the literature. It's a self-confirming attribution error. The industry attributes its difficulties to external forces beyond its control. The external forces are real, of course, but the conditions that make them unmanageable were shaped by institutional choices. Nobody ever gets credit for fixing problems that never happened. And that's, I believe, the trap that we're in now. This capability trap has a specific mechanism in the insurance industry. It operates through something I call pricing blindness. The financial system is designed to detect events, realized claims, observed losses, measurable exposure, and it's very good at this. What it can't see very easily is prevention. It used to be able to be much, much smarter about this, but currently we don't see it in climate as much as we need to. And prevention works, nothing happens. No claims are filed. No losses are recorded. No balance sheet reflects the disaster that did not occur. The industry's own risk models now quantify what managed forests and coastal wetlands are worth in terms of risk reduction. And Mike shared some very important and clear data on that regard. The science is there. The problem is that its own pricing logic renders that value invisible when it comes time to make underwriting decisions. Short-term pricing cycles and the absence of standardized avoided loss cost metrics mean that the mitigation work rarely translates into better coverage terms for the communities that have done the work. And that's, I think, key to why some of Mike's work, which is so clearly meaningful, faces the institutional resistance it does. The value that he demonstrates is real. The transmission mechanism between that value and the financial decisions that would act upon it is much, much less strong. It's mostly broken, and we need to fix it. And this is a place where I think it's important also to connect Simon's account and Mike's directly, because I think that structural connection is the most important idea that I want to bring up here. What Mike showed is about coastal natural capital is structurally identical to what Simon documented from inside the Eaton fire. The mechanism, I believe, is the same in both cases. The system cannot price what it destroys by not measuring it. Florida's mangroves absorbed an estimated $4.8 billion in storm surge during Hurricanes Irma and Ian. No balance sheet recorded the savings. The federal and state agencies that should have been testing for the toxic residue in Altadena refused to do that. No balance sheet recorded that cost either. It was in both cases, the value exists. In both cases, the financial system was designed not to see it. In one case, it was the value of prevention. In the other, it was the cost of abandonment. The geography may be different, but the failure is the same. And until we build institutions capable of seeing both, we will keep producing the outcomes Simon described and the protection gaps that Mike has been measuring. And again, the ounce of prevention Franklin spoke about has a pretty significant modern price tag. And the clearest current figure that I found comes from the 2026 World Economic Forum white paper on wildfire resilience. Every dollar not invested in wildfire preparedness costs more than $22 in lost future economic activity. That's a quantified statement of what the industry has chosen not to do. And the supporting evidence runs through over a century: seat belts, building codes, workplace safety standards, the Catskill watershed protection in New York City that saved $11 billion and kept New York City drinking water from having to go through a massive filtration process. The return on prevention investment runs consistently between $6 and $13 for every dollar invested. Prescribed burns alone could save $7 billion in annual health costs over 25 years. And Florida's mangroves have absorbed billions and billions of dollars in storm surge in a single season. The insurance industry underwrote the 21st century using this kind of logic. Now its current governance structure punishes acting upon it. I don't think this is a change in the science. I don't think it's a change in what's going on the planet. It's a change in the incentives. And incentives can change. And we've seen today in a couple of cases, both on the coast and the fire, that community resilience works. And also the capital markets exist. So why haven't these incentives changed, even as the protection gap continues to expand? And I believe the answer is that the institutional connection between community resilience and the capital that could fund it mostly doesn't exist. And it certainly doesn't exist at the scale and strength it needs to. As I said, as we've seen, community resilience is here. Mutual aid networks, citizen science organizations, watershed stewardship programs, tribal land management practices. These work. They reach people that formal systems miss. And as Simon told us, and as we saw in North Carolina after the recent hurricane, they're self-generated. They're self-generated because the need happens and people find themselves doing the work because they can operate faster than the bureaucracy. But they can't capitalize prevention infrastructure. They can't survive the multi-year arc that climate resilience requires. And they can't translate local prevention work into something that the financial system can underwrite, at least not yet. At the same time, capital markets exist. The money is there. The financial instruments are being built. For example, Blue Forest's Forest Resilience Bond, they just launched their largest bond ever, 4 to 5 times what they started with. Mike's reef insurance programs, parametric triggers, wetland resilience credits, these pieces all exist. What mostly doesn't exist is the institutional layer between them, what David Orr called a connector, an institutional tool capable of translating local prevention into investable, scalable, durable resilience infrastructure. I believe that's the missing middle, and its absence is not a failure of imagination, it's a governance gap. So, if we look over time, we've seen what makes these kinds of connectors last, because we've seen this kind of tool work in other contexts. The models that do persist share 3 features. First, institutional anchors with independent reasons to sustain that effort, reasons that outlast any individual champion or founding organization. Second, a financial logic that reinforces the mission rather than competing with it. And third, a governance structures integrated into the operating frameworks rather than dependent on discretionary funding or political goodwill. The Forest Resilience Bond works because water agencies, utilities, and public funders can evaluate avoided loss as a direct investment in their own financial stability. The Caribbean Reef Insurance Program works because the sovereign treaty backing outlasts any single administration. And the Catskill Watershed Program worked because New York City captured enough of the benefit directly to justify the investment, and a regulatory mandate created the forcing function. Insurance, at its structural best, provides all 3 anchors simultaneously. It has capital, long-term planning horizons, risk models capable of valuing prevention, and along with a genuine financial interest in avoiding costs. The question is whether it will occupy that function again, or whether we will have to build around it or even through it. Swiss Re's own modeling suggests that meaningful engagement would require 15 to 20% of industry assets directed towards prevention and resilience. Currently, the industry deploys around 5%. So they need to triple, or even quadruple the amount of money they need to spend, even under their own figures. That gap isn't ignorance. It's Swiss Re's own data. The industry's actuaries can model a return on prevention investment. The gap between what industry knows and what it deploys is well documented, quantified, and consistent across years of reporting. It's a governance structure that consistently overrides what the institution knows in favor of what the incentive structure rewards. Quarterly earnings cycles punish long horizon investment. Regulatory frameworks reward withdrawal over engagement in high hazard markets, or even, as Mike pointed out, they perversely reward rebuilding in high hazard markets. The accountability structures that would penalize institutional abdication do not exist at all at the scale the problem requires. And that's the argument I want to end with. The capital exists, the instruments are being built, the science is settled. What's missing is institutional alignment and public accountability. And governance problems, unlike climate change itself, are entirely within our power to solve. The question is not whether the system changes. The question is whether we change it deliberately or wait for it to fail completely and have to build something from the wreckage. Now, Simon has spent a lot of his career studying the kinds of systems that are now failing. Mike has spent decades demonstrating the real value of natural capital. It's real, measurable, and actionable. I study the architecture of that failure, and the conclusion I keep returning to is this. The industry that's built to make risk bearable has structured itself not to see the most important risks of our time. That's not a natural outcome, it's a choice. And I think we can choose differently. The question is not whether this system changes. It will. It's too unstable not to. The question is whether what replaces it is designed to see what this system is designed not to. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. It was a brilliant connection between the two and really pointing us to what the crucial issues are. We have time for questions. Let's see. I see three. I see Bob Kilbrick. Simon had a. Well, no, maybe Bob is just doing an applause. Dorita, you're muted. Can you help me here in
Yeah,
terms of
so there's a
one of those
couple of
questions?
things in the chat. Simon wanted to, well, Mike wanted to respond about the risk pricing issue, and Simon also wanted to talk about reinsurance. And so maybe throwing the ball back to our panelists to let them comment on each other might
I
be.
wanted to ask about reinsurance too, so let's go with that.
Sure, absolutely. This is a story that was told to me by a person who was referred to as UCI's climate and sustainability czar over 10 years ago. And he told me a story of going to London, and he couldn't say specifically the place that he went to because he had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, but it was a major reinsurance company, and I'm guessing it was Lloyd's of London or something of that scale. He said he went into a very large building, and they went through several floors of offices and the usual sorts of things, and a couple of floors of supercomputers, and they entered into a room with nothing but large-scale maps of every coastline on the planet. And this will be, of course, relevant to Mike's subject of concern. And the person that was showing this guy around said, "See those color codes on the coastlines? Those indicate the year that we will stop insuring property insurance companies on those coastlines." So, to concur with what Josh was saying, at least the reinsurance industry has known these risks for decades, and they have factored it in to their business model, and presumably some of the pressure on the insurance companies in California and so on is that they are finding it difficult to insure their own operations.
Did you want to get a response from one of our other panelists?
Totally, just throwing that out there as an maybe Josh has a response to that, or Mike, not sure.
I'd like to hear Josh and Mike, because it seems to me in a lot of these things, the problem is that one insurance company or one, insuring one home, doing things that maybe help that home but make things worse, increase the hazard elsewhere. We were hearing stories like that. That's an issue at the local scale, but reinsurance is so big, you'd think they'd be able to internalize that, and they would have natural incentives to recognize the value of prevention and so on, and to be a means for that, but evidently not. So I'd like to hear a response of well, maybe Mike hasn't had a chance for first Mike and then Joshua, but
Sure.
what's blocking reinsurance from playing a more productive role here, and what might be done?
Well, okay, so I'll try to keep it like super brief because there's a lot of different things to be said here. One, actually, many of the industry risk models are not as good as you would hope. Part of this is because they're modeling many different kinds of risk. And so when you talk about when they revise models, they're often on a 5-year cycle, which these days is sort of crazy. That's going to change pretty rapidly. Some AI and GPU induced changes you'll likely see soon, which allow that to be much more frequent. But they don't redo that nearly as much as we might hope. And they then also don't include as many factors as they ought to be including. Although Josh's points well taken, and some of the points that I made, what they do choose to include is quite problematic. I characterize a lot of what Josh is saying, that my views, or I don't want to characterize for Josh, but my views on this is that risk makes money. And so you're not making money preventing risk. You're making money if risk is increasing, but people can still afford it. That's kind of what I see out there as the kind of driver for this, and that's in part why you don't see incentives for reducing it nearly as much as we would hope.
Well,
Joshua, you want to say a few
sure.
words?
I want to first talk a little bit about the insurance versus reinsurance in California, and there's a structural mismatch because, of course, a primary insurer insures individual properties that across a region, and fire, as we know, and as Firewise is finally starting to say, isn't an individual house problem particularly in the WUI. It's a collective action problem. You need a community that has to behave as if the forest fire interface is valuable to respect along the lines. You need to harden. If you're going to go hardening, you need to harden everything. It's kind of the metaphor that I like to use is herd immunity with vaccines. If one house is protected and the house next to it is not, and its cinders fall on its roof and it catches fire, it doesn't matter that you've trimmed your property line and you've maintained your own vegetative buffer zone. Both houses are going to burn. So it's a collective action problem, and individual insurance companies aren't set up to do that collectively. Reinsurance companies have a little bit better stake of it because they're backstopping a broad range. My conversations with reinsurance companies have said, well, they don't really think fire is important as sea level rise. So they're going to focus much more of their monies on dealing with the coast. That may come to change a little bit because the staggering cost figures that came out of, what happened in Los Angeles, I think, are going to really have to refocus it. But the incentives aren't set up for community-based things. There's the parametric model, which is working for hurricanes. That might have some value in forests where you actually just pay out according to the damage. The idea that wind and storm and weather damage all can be discretely separated out when they're all integrated. That needs to go out. Those are governance conversations. We don't, we've let the insurance industry move to self-organizing its own process. We've forgotten that it's actually a social value. There's a reason that many insurance companies in the 20th century called themselves Mutual. Mutual of Omaha was they funded Bill Moyers for many years. They did lots of things. The Wild Kingdom. They were designed not to be run by a small group of management for their shareholders' benefit. They were designed to be the stakeholders' benefit. That's the whole point of Mutual. That's the whole point that Franklin started. That's where Lloyd's of London started. Um, and so that's a transformation of governance. And by doing that, then they lost track of that social need. And that's where the community has to come back, where we as citizens have to come back. Every state has an insurance mandate. They control the way companies do business in every state. Most countries have very similar things. And we need to be rethinking what are the requirements of insurance and how much of that is private and how much of that is social benefit. The fact that, the public health benefits of reducing smoke are staggeringly big and now have finally become measurable. Why aren't we Where is the community benefit? Where's the public health benefit? Where is the collective action benefit conversation happening that would allow these situations like Simon, that you shouldn't be using your community self-organized group to measure toxins? That's a public benefit. That's something that the community, that the government should do in any reasonable state. Why are we letting that happen? And that's where I think we as citizens have a lot of ability to influence where we are.
Thank you, all three. I should put this open to other questions from the audience.
So Dan, Sandy's actually next.
Okay.
My question's in the chat, but I'll state it orally. I'd like to step back for a minute. First of all, thanks to three brilliant presenters. It's been a very, very thought-provoking session for me. Here's my question. Let's stand back. Without arguing the fact that the insurance agents are maybe not as helpful as they should be, I'm trying to understand the magnitude of the exposure independent of the industry's response. I'll ask two questions. One is, could somebody tell me what should have ideally happened in Altadena before the fire that could have made a real difference, and how much it would have cost per dwelling? My question there is, really, could anything realistically be done, or was the die already cast just because Altadena was built next to a wildland that was highly flammable in a windy environment, and sooner or later this catastrophe would have happened regardless of what we did? And so basically, it's not a question of how we built the houses, it's the fact that we simply have cities that are next to flammable regions. Point number one. And a related question is Mike's slide, where he showed the difference between flooding damage with and without mangroves. And I'm not saying that mangroves aren't important, Mike, but still, the mangroves were a small issue on top of this gigantic other flood risk. And so again, I ask the question, yes, we could have mangoes, but is that just a small little bit on top of the basic fact that we should not be building there in the first place?
So, Sandy, do you have someone you want to answer this first?
I don't know who would have
let's start with Mike.
the perspective.
Well, for the mangrove question, okay, yes, what I can't show very effectively in that video of the difference is the flood height, which is actually also quite important in the damages calculation. For the Ian event, it was 30% of damages. When we looked at wetlands, the remaining wetlands in counties in New Jersey, looking annually, it was 16%. What I showed you, actually, right off the top of my head, I can't remember the percent for Collier County. All within the range of which you should expect premium incentives. Like, you think about what's the level at which you get premium incentives for the protection benefits of. So at that level, the existing ones, absolutely. But it's also absolutely correct. And you can look on Google Earth and you look at the images. Anytime that you see news stories about coastal homes damaged in storms in Florida, you look and you see they're put in the stupidest of places. You didn't have to be, a deeply informed planner to know that that was horribly risky, where we put those places. So yes, I think that there need to be changes in how we're assessing risk, where we're allowing that development, and then valuing even now what we have in place.
Can somebody comment on my question in regard to the Eaton fire? Simon?
Sure, I'll buy in. I mean, one of the things that I noticed when I moved to LA from Australia, well, I didn't move directly. It doesn't matter. LA feels like a shanty town to me. It's built with the absolute lowest cost materials in the fastest way, in ways that are climate and sustainability, where climate and sustainability are not considered in the slightest. I see buildings with large south-facing walls with no eaves, and then giant air conditioning systems on the roof. And as I put in the chat there, one of my architect friends, when I saw houses being rebuilt with stick built with plywood cladding in the fire zone, I was just astonished. And as I said, an architect friend of mine calls stick building not architecture but organized tinder. Likewise, I'm utterly baffled by asphalt roofing tiles. That never happens in Australia. In a country that's very used to fires. All the roofs are tin or ceramic or concrete. They don't burn. Asphalt roofing is like coating your building with a firelighter. I find it just alarming. So regulation is a key part, no doubt, and clearly we know the history of LA. A city that has grown out of real estate development with no substantial planning, and we suffer that in many ways, not just in LA, but in many US cities. Just a lack of planning. That's all I've got to say about that. I hope that's useful and not just a rant.
Can I build on that? It wasn't a rant. It's a good observation of our completely abandonment of looking at nature as a place where we cited. But both what Mike said and what you just said show that we've trained ourselves to ignore the natural environment when we put shelter. And we didn't always do that. Even the Spanish housing has terracotta roofing. It's not an accident that was terracotta roofing. But I'd like to point out a couple of things to Sandra's question. First, every inch of California historically burned on a regular basis. Estimates are every 7 to 10 years, not just the fires, the coastline, the plains. And obviously, when you suppress fire for 150 years, lots of fuel builds up, and it's pretty hard to avoid catastrophic overlay. That said, after the 2018 fires in LA, there were massive amounts of planning done. County by county, not county, but town by town, region by region. And a lot of it was some of the common sense things that we talk about. Reduction of overgrown material, giving defensible space around housing. The problem was, I think, pretty clearly that it was about $1 billion overall spread across 30 or 40 communities. And communities started to do it, and then they gave up. They didn't complete the work. So they had some places, there were cases where some communities and some houses within various communities had done certain kinds of fire protection and resistance and resilience work, and others hadn't. So we go back to the herd immunity. It wasn't, they felt that $1 billion collectively across, a stretch of a tranche of LA, about a third of LA, was too much money for them to spend. And look what happened. So I think to your larger point, fire is inevitable. It's a part of the natural existence. The question, though, is in California, in the WUI and elsewhere, how do we get through how do we get through to a point where we can bring that kind of fire regime back? And how do we reduce the amount of overgrowth? And how do we build communities that are connected to areas with a lot of woodland, and in a place where that can work?
Is anybody
I see
thinking
that
about
somebody put in the
basic
ahead.
rules for this? Is there an organized group taking this Uber picture, this Uber arching view?
Well,
No.
It's say what you will, but there is a Firewise Council run by the state that takes upon itself to do this. And they have districts that are fairly well organized. But again, it's not funded. It's all semi-volunteer. They put out rules that they expect people to do, and they don't really have the system to follow up.
Okay.
We had an informational question. Sorry. Didn't mean to cut you off, Josh.
No, actually, I'm looking at Karen and her question, and I'm curious about whether we're talking about a different set of definition terms or not.
I had two comments. One was about the fire insurance rule, because you said 7 to 10 years throughout California, and I don't think that's correct. There may be certain areas of California, but like I said, the historic work, Gene Langenheim, who was a professor, had a student who did history, and historically lightning strike fires were probably more, obviously this is an average, 100, 150 years. And then, of course, the Native Americans burned certain areas in the grasslands.
Right, but the Native Americans have been here for 10,000 years.
They have, but they didn't burn every inch of California. That's just, I'm not saying that these aren't fire adapted systems, but saying that every inch of California burns every 7 to 10 years is an overstatement.
It may be an overstatement. That came out of the Sage Hen plan. So it may be focused on the Sierras, but yes, that's where I got.
In coastal California, the frequency was not that high. Yeah, that's not every inch of California. You could go up to north.
I'm willing.
The very northern part of California where it's wetter on the coast, and it's definitely not, that. So yeah, right. I would just be careful about generalizations, because it's all about local disturbance regimes and local ecosystems, which have different adaptations.
Sure. Okay.
So did that. Also, I say the Firewise, because my neighborhood's a Firewise neighborhood. It is coordinated sort of region by region, is voluntary, Sandy. The incentive, at least, that got the person in my neighborhood who started it, and we've been moving it, is partly because you do get an insurance discount on the FAIR plan, and it's not huge. It's like 10 to 15% or something like that. And some of the other groups give those types of discounts if you are Firewise certified. And so there's you have to come up with a 3-year plan, and there's various things you can do, like make sure, the brush is cleared and stuff. Like there are different activities, making sure that all the houses are clearly labeled with numbers and stuff like that. So
sounds like it's wildly inadequate for the magnitude.
It is wildly inadequate, but it is a step in the right direction towards prevention, and it does do what Josh was saying, of sort of, it forces neighborhoods to coordinate more as a group. So no, I'm not suggesting it's the answer, but it does move it away from just a single family home management approach.
I'm an executive director of the Fire Safe Council here in Ojai, in California. And I just want to concur with you, Karen, is that the NFPA Firewise community program its threshold for risk reduction is way too low, but it qualifies people. It's more of a behavioral change model, right? It's getting people to act collectively as opposed to individually. But, my only complaint about it is that the risk reduction measures necessary to maintain your certification are way below what is necessary to provide herd immunity in many settings.
Mm.
So just one quick comment, and then we have an informational question from Sabina von Meering. My quick comment is up in the chat. I linked to a David Wallace Wells op-ed piece in the New York Times that was commenting on the LA fires, and has talked about, kind of answered your question, Sandy, about what can be done and what local governments were trying to push through and what communities were trying to push through, and then noted the behavioral problem. Josh called it the collective action problem of some communities, for example, Brentwood, being like, no, you're not cutting down our trees. I visited a friend recently in Woodside and was just in the hills and was like, oh my God, to me, it just screamed out, this is a disaster waiting to happen. But these more affluent communities are like, you're not going to touch my hedge. You're not going to touch my tree. So that is a problem. And that's where, again, government comes in, but government doesn't want to offend the very constituents who don't want change. So that's a thing. Sabina von Meering wants to know about Josh's slide number 5, the $1.8 trillion gap that he mentioned. Is it for the US or California? US specific as a whole?
I think it's the US as a whole.
Got it. All right. Well, this has been amazing. Please share the Zoom recording that we'll have available within the week. Many thanks to Caroli for hosting this and getting that uploaded. And I wonder if really quick, each of our panelists could just put their emails in the chat if other people have questions or want to follow up or sing their praises, they would be able to reach them that way.
I want to say one more thing. You know, this panel is all because of Dorita. It wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Thank you, Dorit.
And take a lot of imagination. I hope this is the start of something too, to connect things that we don't usually connect.
Yeah, excellent.
I think you did a brilliant job of picking the panelists,
right,
and getting this conversation going.
All right, well, back at you on this Earth Futures Institute YouTube page that you're going to share when the video is available. You'll also find a video of a talk called Dan, help me out here, A Tale of Two Scorpions, about climate science meets actuarial science. And it's very much the prelude and the inspiration for this panel was another panel that Dan was part of, and you can find that video there, and I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I just want to second that. I thought that panel was extremely interesting and informative for me. So thank you, Dan, for being part of that.
Many thanks to all of our panelists and our moderator. You guys have been just wonderful and so much to think about here.
Right. Bye all.
Thank you, everyone.
So great job. Just many, 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 many thanks to all of you. Caroli, thank you.
Of course, you're welcome. I'm glad I'm back in town. It seems like I'm gone 1 week and the world explodes. So it takes a little bit. Oh, hello.
I was just going to say, I'll just say thank you very much. And I look forward to when the video will be posted, because next week I'm talking about climate and sustainability in my class. And if the video's up in time, I'd love to give it to my students. It is the last week of quarter, so I know it's a little tight. But thank you, Caroli, for driving, and thank you, Dorita, for the work you did. I'll get out of here now. We'll be in touch.
Absolutely.
I hope.
Thank you. All righty. Bye.
Have a great day. Okay. Dorit left. Karen, are you still there? Hello, Sudeep. Everyone. Okay. Very good. I will then stop recording.